Good evening. Welcome to Larry Rinker Golf live from the cabin in Avon, Colorado. Hope you're having a great week. Really pleased to have my guest on tonight, Dr. Rob Neal, and just like to share a few screens here. But here we are. I've got a new book out called The Journeyman. You can pick that up at larryrinker.com. It's really how a veteran tour player found the swing after 50 years. A lot of great stories, anecdotes in there. So hopefully you check it out. But I'm really excited about. There's my guest tonight, Dr. Rob Neal. And Dr. Rob, always great to have you on the show. I've learned so much from you. You've measured me in my putting and in my short game and my distance wedges. And, it's always great to have great data to learn from. But you've done some recent work on wrist angles. So share with us what you found out.
So Larry, what I'll do is I'll assume that the audience is pretty naive on this.
Okay.
I just want to go through the joint movements so that people understand, if we talk about wrist flexion, what that actually is.
Great.
Right? And I think that that's a good starting point, get the foundations in place. So I'm assuming everyone can see my left, my left, even though it might look like a right forearm, it's my left one here. And when my hand moves down like that, and you get what the golf coaches would call a bowed wrist.
Right.
I call that flexion, and what you might call a cupped wrist is extension.
Right.
Right. So then if you look at the other way that the wrist moves, Larry, so this would be ulnar deviation.
Right.
And this would be radial deviation. Now, there's a bunch of different kind of language in the golf world that is used to describe that, right? So sometimes this is called cocking, right? And uncocking the wrists.
Right.
Or releasing the club is essentially the same sort of thing. And then there's a third rotation that's not really at the wrist joint, but it's in the forearm, and it has a profound influence on how the club face is oriented. And that's what we would call pronation and supination.
Right.
Okay. And again, I'm not actually sure what the golf jargon is for that one, Larry. You might be able to help me out there.
Well, it's interesting because one hand is supinating and the other one's pronating.
Yeah.
So we would just call that a rotation.
Right.
But I think people understand that, those terms, but, you've described it as really well. I mean, and I think that people understand what extension and flexion means, and then what the cocking and uncocking, and then also let's just say the rotation. Your arm can rotate one way or the other.
Yeah, that's right. And it's really the term, say, for example, supination or pronation refers to the direction that rotation is happening. Right. So it's not a position. Like my forearm is pronated now, and I move it in a supinated direction.
Right.
Or I move it into pronation. So it's important. It's indicating which direction it's moving.
Right.
And just like you said, during the golf swing, these two forearms need to move in concert. So one's probably going to be pronating while the other's supinating, and vice versa. Well, you can't have opposite things happening or hands aren't working together on the golf club.
Right.
But if you think about what happens during like the first part of the backswing, for example, or what you would like to have happen, maybe that's a better way to put it, Larry, is that let me just tip my camera down a little bit here. So as you start, it's almost like the trail forearm stays pronated. The kind of the last thing you'd want, unless you're trying to hit a flop shot or a bunker shot, is to do this with the forearm, right? So if your trail forearm goes this way, your club face is going to go wide open, right?
Yeah, but there's some of that in the backswing.
In the early part of the backswing, not a lot. Later on, there is.
Yeah, but I have to say, I'm not a fan of this keeping the club head outside your hands going back that I see a lot of guys working on.
Well,
Because
we can disagree on that one, Larry.
Because I say this, I would like to think that at any point in my backswing, I could shift my weight into my front foot and hit the golf ball. So if my right arm and hand is like, let me keep it in the camera. If my right arm and hand is like that, and I haven't had some of that in the arm and hand, I'm not ready to go the other way with it. If my arm and hand's like that, I've got to get it there so I can let it go.
Yeah. I didn't say that that's where we're going to finish, Larry.
Right.
But in that early part of the, I mean, I'm just reading the data, Larry. This is what the good players do. They do not go and rip that club face open unless they're hitting a flop shot or a...
Right, but I'm just saying, all I'm guessing, because you got the data, all I'm guessing is there's some.
Yeah, there might be a little bit, but...
Right.
But most of the rotation of the club face, in terms of its orientation, is coming through rotation of your torso and the connection between your arms and the body anyway. So so because my view is that you do not want to have this club face going wide open unless
you don't. Shot. But wouldn't you say the external rotation in the right shoulder and the right arm is different for different players? I mean, basically, if we look at the top players
it's
your average mid-core PGA Tour player, they're going to have a certain thing. But, you know, somebody like me, I can't bend that arm back. There's no way. I don't have any external rotation there in my shoulder. That's a great test for somebody to wonder if they're an upper core player or not. So if I can't bend that back like this, then I'm probably going to be upper core. My elbow, I'm probably going to do what you're saying because my elbow is going to go back like that because I can't really rotate it externally that much.
Yeah, I mean, if you've lost range of movement in external rotation of your shoulder,
right,
that's going to really change what your possibilities are.
Totally.
How you would make your forearms and your wrists work.
Right.
Because
well, we've seen a lot of, but I would say this, Doc, we've seen a lot of different backswings on the tour. Look at Raymond Floyd.
Yeah.
Okay. We've seen some, but I think what you really want to talk about is the similarities of what you see with the better players, correct?
Yeah, well, I want to say that there are a number of different patterns that work, but you've got to get the pattern to match what the player is doing. Like,
right.
It would be really a bad story if someone said you've got to bow your wrist like Dustin Johnson.
Right.
And they've got a swing where their hands are really flat.
Right. Well, not many people can swing like Dustin Johnson.
True. But one of the, especially last weekend, right?
Yeah.
He put on a display there. But one of the things that he has to do in order to make this very, very flexed wrist condition work that he has at the top of the backswing, he needs to get his hands very high. Because if they're low, then the club face or the club head is going to be so low, you have no hope of ever getting that thing on plane and not hitting snap hooks or big blocks all the time. Right?
He's going to have trouble hitting the ball first, not the ground.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's the best case, that he makes contact with the ball
So
and
let's go back to where you started. So you're saying in the first part of the backswing, you're not seeing a lot of external rotation in
no,
the
no,
right
I said supination of the forearm.
Okay. Of
See,
the right arm,
of the trail arm, yep.
trail arm, right.
You don't see very much.
Okay.
Later on in the backswing, as you lift your arms and you head to the top, you're going to see then some supination, pronation. And
Right.
of course, as you mentioned, right, if you've got external range of motion at your trail shoulder, you'll start to get external rotation. So
Right.
if you go this way, and if someone lacks external rotation like you, then what will happen is that their elbow will start looking like this.
Jack Nicklaus.
Yeah, there you go. Now, I don't know if he was lacking in external rotation, but that's the characteristic of his swing, right?
Right, right.
And someone who's got plenty of range, they'll look more like this, with the elbow pointing more down than out to the side like that.
And
right?
Dustin Johnson, I bet, has a lot.
Oh, massive flexibility there.
Right.
So, you know, depending on what's happening at your trail shoulder, there are perhaps three things that are going to influence the plane that the club will end up working on. So your ability to either do this or not. So if you go this way, that's really going to make the swing path steep, right?
Right. Coming down.
Yep, coming down, because you're going to be pushing this way, whereas what maybe you'd like in an ideal world is to have your shoulder going this way, like a sidearm throw.
Right. And
So-
that's what you see with all the good players. You see
Yep.
that, right?
You see it as, you know, you would call it probably a shallowing of the shaft.
Right.
And perhaps the most dramatic example that I can think of the current players is Matthew Wolff, right?
Yeah, he's got more planes in that swing than Delta.
that American Airlines has on the ground at the moment. Yeah, so you know, he goes from across the line and really steep to a big shallowing move, and then if you start to look at him from, I'll use the golf machine or Mac O'Grady stuff, from about P5 through to
Right.
P8. You might not be able to tell him from any of the other tour players, because
Right.
he's repositioned the club and his body so beautifully then, and just rotates nicely through.
But he really doesn't rotate that much through. He actually rotates and goes vertical. So his hip rotation and impact probably isn't that much. He's close to being an upper core player because he goes vertically a ton.
Yeah, there are not many people these days who don't go vertical, because
Well, Dustin Johnson doesn't use verticals very much.
He uses the ground a lot.
But he uses it more laterally and rotary than he does vertically.
I don't know. You have a look at his feet at impact. They're not very, they're not.
Well, I'll just say
Planted on the
this, it's
ground.
hard to jump out of your left heel.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you're hitting irons, he's not going to be in the
Right.
pushing up in there. But, you know, when he hits
He doesn't jump like Justin Thomas
No, definitely not.
or Cam Champ.
No. Yeah, that's true.
Or even Bryson DeChambeau.
Yeah, or Phil Mickelson.
Oh, Phil's biggest ground force is verticals because he's upper core, just like me. But anyway, you want to talk a little bit about the top of the swing and what's actually happening in these wrist angles. And my friend John Sinclair, I know you know John, did something on this, and I got to say this has really helped me. What you're going to share, because really pretty much every good player does this, don't they?
Yeah. What I'm going to, whoops, do is share my screen here with you, Larry, and we're just going to. I know that some of it may go out over the head of some of the people watching here, but I'll try to make it explain it slowly so that people stay in touch. Because the idea is not to confuse them and not to show how clever we are versus anyone else. The idea is to try to have them understand a couple of the different patterns that you might see in the way the wrists move. And we're going to talk about those 3 wrist motions. So I'll share the screen here. And I'm assuming now, Larry, that you can see my screen, right?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So I just brought up Jason Duffner here, and I chose him because he's got a pattern of wrist movements that I think that not unnecessarily exemplar, but they match what he does with his kind of pretty low arm plane,
right,
and deep rotation with his body and his pelvis and upper torso. So just let's do this. All right, let's focus. And I hope there aren't too many colorblind people, because Martin Hall always says, "Oh, which color is that?" Here we have the flexion extension.
The green.
Green, okay? And these letters, Larry, are address, top, and impact, just to give it a time frame.
Oh, that's great, yeah.
So right now we have Jason at the top of the backswing. And maybe I should just very quickly go first to address, put the face on view here, so that we're reminded. If we zoom right in on his left wrist here, Larry, you'll see that his wrist is in a lot of extension there, right?
Right.
He has a strong grip, and that's, when you put your left hand over top of the grip like that, your wrist is going to be in extension. So that's not a good hitting position.
Well, it is for Dustin Johnson.
At impact?
No, but I'm saying he's going to have a strong grip at address.
Oh yeah, he's got a strong. But if he delivered the club like that, it wouldn't be a good hitting position, is what I'm saying.
No.
For the wrist. So when we go to the top of the backswing, and it's probably easier to see from this perspective here, he's got rid of a lot of that extension, and it's looking kind of conventional now, right?
Right.
Strong club face, obviously.
Right.
This is pointing much towards the sky, and not much extension.
Right.
As he moves down into the downswing, he just keeps it there. It's not like he has this big move where he goes and flexes the left wrist. It just stays there. And then if we go right down to P6 here, now as he's getting this in the delivery part here, now he's really starting to bow that left wrist in preparation for impact. And there he is at impact there. And it's probably easier from the face on view here. If I move this out of the way, if we look at impact, that's one of the things with the animation. It's different to video. It looks like he's in a lot of extension, but he's not really. He's really leaning the shaft forward here, and the left wrist is bowed. But a very important message, Larry, that needs to go out there is that you don't maintain wrist flexion like this all the way through it, impact, and into the follow through. That is not what happens.
No. Otherwise, you're going to break your wrist.
You'll either break your wrist or you just won't have any club head speed.
Right. Because would you agree with this? Almost all golfers, even people like Dustin Johnson or Daniel Berger with really strong left-hand grips, pretty much everybody is going toward extension coming into the ball.
Everyone is, huh, Larry.
So
That's
this idea that we hold that and turn is wrong.
it is wrong. It might be a kind of an
It might
image
be a
that
feel,
yeah, an
but
image
it doesn't
that
really
people-
happen, does it?
It does not happen because that club head is going much faster than your hands, and so it's going to overtake your hands.
Right.
And so your wrist is going to go into extension.
And it's really hard to see it on video, and that's where, with your system and your software you've developed and your whole system that you have, that you actually can measure it and say, yeah, it's moving. That's what's happening.
Yeah.
And you know, I get so many people trying to pull, turn, and hold angles, and it's like, where are the speed police?
Yeah, you just put the shackles on them if you tell them to do that.
Right.
So the interesting thing with Jason is that he has this flexion occurring quite late in the downswing, and that pattern can work. I mean, clearly he's a noted ball striker. He's not that
Right.
powerful, but he certainly can control the golf ball.
Especially irons. He's an incredible iron player.
Thank you. He really is. And so, although people will say, oh, no, this flexion is occurring too late in the downswing, you say, not necessarily. He manages to make that work. Now, I think one of the other interesting aspects of Jason is that let's have a look at the top of the backswing. His forearm, his lead forearm, is in pronation. Let's call it 125. And then at impact, it's 65. So he's rotated in this direction 65 degrees during the entire downswing.
Wow. That's a lot.
No, it's not that much. That's the interesting thing for Jason. He has some, everyone has some. But I'm going to show you an example in a moment of John Senden, whose pronation or supination velocity is much, much higher. And again, let's just bring him up. I'll bring up John now.
Is he a fellow Aussie?
He is. And just as a little history on John, for those people who may not know him, in the years from about 2000 and I want to say 10 or 11 through to about 2015 or 16, he was about the best ball striker on tour.
Right.
And so I might just play the animation in case people haven't seen what his swing looks like, just to give them a little bit of a feel. Because it's not what you might call classic golf swing look, right? He has a big down hinge here, and then it looks kind of flippy through impact and that sort of thing. And I go, well, this guy was the best ball striker on tour for many, many years. So this can obviously work, right?
Right.
And if we have a look at his lead wrist graph, it looks very, very different
Right.
to Jason's, right?
Yep.
So let's just go through that. So here he is at the top. His wrist is, maybe if I look at from this way. So very upright swing, right? Wrist is in slight extension. And then, even though he shallows the shaft here, Larry, that shaft has gone shallow, right?
Right.
His wrist is even in more extension here.
That's rare.
That is very, very rare. Yeah. So that's why one of the reasons why I want to share this with you is that, hey, here's a guy, great ball striker, but does something a little unusual.
Well, one thing I learned from John Sinclair is that the lead wrist, the change in the angles, is much more style, whereas the trail wrist is not as much deviation there among the players. Would you agree with that?
Do you know, I don't know, but that's a point worth going and looking at, Larry. Thank you for sharing
But
that.
that's what he said, because you could have somebody like Paul Azinger with a really cupped left wrist at the top to Dustin Johnson, but how much the right hand is at the top. But, it's interesting that he's not going toward
flexion
with
until late
with that left wrist. And
yeah,
I'll tell you what, I see a lot of times on video when the shaft is parallel to the ground for a lot of my amateurs, and they got the face open.
Oh, yeah.
And how often do you see a tour player with the face open with the shaft parallel to the ground?
I mean,
not very often.
You rarely see that, right?
Yeah. So I think something for our amateurs out there is tour players are actually closing that face, not John Sinden, but a lot are actually starting to close the face a lot earlier than we probably ever thought, right?
Yeah. So this is an unusual pattern. So this is not something that you or I might advocate for an amateur player, Larry, because I think that this could be a disaster for them where they go more into cupped.
They're already going there, Doc. They're coming over the top, and that's what they do. That right hand's going this way from, the right hand's going this way from the top.
Yeah. So we've got to get them out of that.
It's not going the way the tour players do.
Yeah. So I think that, maybe we should show someone who's, maybe a little more conventional.
Right.
Call it that way. This is a pattern that I like. This is Jonathan Bird.
Okay.
And again, we can go straight to the graph here. This is what I would tell a lot of amateurs to do, Larry. See how when he gets to the top, his wrist immediately moves into flexion.
Which means he's closing the club face.
Yep, squaring it up and probably de-lofting it. So if we go to the animation and see what that looks like. So there he is at the top. And you'll see immediately the left wrist goes into flexion and like it's really very flat there. And he doesn't have that sharp into flexion and then back into extension. He has this much slower flexion movement and then down to impact.
Well, what's amazing there going into impact is how much the blue line, how much of the lead forearm rotation he has.
Yeah.
And the speed.
Yep.
A ton of it.
That's he does. He has a ton of it. Goes from 100 at the top to 60 at impact. Not as much as Jason, but so he's got a slower forearm release, if I can call it that, than Jason. Whereas John Senden's is really fast. Like he's got a lot of rotation occurring. So,
well, Doc, just some great stuff there. We're out of time, but
how quickly did that go, Larry?
That went quickly. But what we're talking about is getting those forearms to start rotating and the wrist angles to change, really more the wrist angles than the forearm rotation at the top. And you want to go into distance wedges, but it's so key for distance wedges. And one thing I find with a lot of my students, if they're over the top and cutting across it and the wrists are going, they're letting this go early.
Yep.
They don't hit a sand wedge anywhere.
No, they'll just hit it straight up.
Whereas a good player is those wrist angles are going like that, and then they're rotating the forearms coming through, they're trapping it, they're flighting that ball lower, and now all of a sudden they can get a lot more consistent with controlling distance. And I know you've done a lot of work with Tom Kite, and you've done work with Jason Duffner and Luke Donald, and those distance wedges.
That's what those guys do, Larry. And you just said it beautifully. Like you have to get this wrist going into flexion, trail wrist into extension, And
Yeah.
that'll allow you to lean the shaft forward and be able to flight your wedges.
No, it's so key. It's so key for all of that.
Yep. Larry, thank you very much for inviting me on again.
Well, always great to have you on, Doc. And if anybody wants to find out more about Dr. Rob Neal, you can go to golfbiodynamics.com. And I'd like to thank my sponsors, Titleist, FootJoy, the Ritz-Carlton Golf Club Orlando, and the Red Sky Golf Club in Vail, Colorado, and FlightScope, and Right Balance, and V1, all my sponsors. But Dr. Rob Neal, always great to have you on, and I always love learning from you. The 3D data and the stuff that you've done has really helped all of us instructors. So thank you so much for sharing what.
My pleasure, Larry.
Well, Dr. Rob Neal would like to thank you for watching Larry Rinker Golf Live. Till next week, keep swinging.